This is Reality Dispatch, written by Jim Mins.
The Stogatronian was circular and tiny, and when compared to earthly measurements, it appeared no bigger than the edge of the side of a baby's clipped toenail. Easy to miss. Its power lay in its undetectable nature and its ability to use this stealth-like appearance to traverse large swathes of the galaxy. The population of Stogatronians, numbering in the trillions, set off on their mission to explore the universe many millions of years ago. The alien destined to touch down on Earth did so on the 9th of February, 2025 at 5:38 in the evening. An expert at survival, it used its reduced mass to push against the gravitational pull that Earth was known for and float towards a host in which it could establish itself to the neuron control and continue its mission under the guise of a human facade. In order to preserve itself for enhanced and prolonged investigations, it decided to attach itself to the largest, most fearsome specimen within a 3-mile radius. Landon held his arms up and had the armor placed over them. He ducked his head into the neck window and felt the familiar pull. He was laced up and battle-ready. He stood and walked towards the 9-foot mirrors that the Superdome had provided in the locker rooms. He eyed himself up, wanting to scare something inside. He imagined the defensive tackle of the Chiefs. What's his name? He couldn't remember names on game day. The one who held the ring that was meant for his finger. He was angry. Anger was good. Anger was necessary. Anger would serve him when he pummeled through on a punt. "Head in the game!" someone yelled. The locker room was quiet otherwise. They had been there before. The Eagles. They had been there before, and they had lost. His ring finger still felt bare, naked. This information acted like a sharpened knife plunged into the nerve endings of his anger control. He wanted to be out of control. It was better that way. His helmet was brought over by the assistant coach. He lowered his neck to allow the crown to be placed through. The dome came down and encased his entire skull. He felt a tickle in his ear just as they were consumed. It was too late to scratch it. The team assembled. He felt a slap on the back of his helmet. It was time. They began the descent down the tunnel towards the field where the thousands sat, ready to watch, ready to scream, ready for blood. Then everything went dark. This particular alien was referred to as Nano, but no one within 1,000,000 light years knew that. He had connected his organic processor to the neuron control of the man-beast who wore the domed helmet, just as it came down to lock the alien inside its ear. The man-beast zoned out while Nano took operational control, just as he had trained for on Stogatron those millions upon millions of years earlier. Nano, as a parasite, watched as the host stood amongst a battle formation of other man-beasts in appearance. They lined up to attack their opposing numbers. It was easy to determine who was a friend and who was a foe. The friends all wore green, just as Nano's host did. The enemies wore red and had matching helmets. Nano was eased by the sight. He had wondered if his observations of this species would require him to learn and adapt to lengthy periods of study in order to comprehend the depths of their philosophies and mannerisms. Before he entered the skull of the man-beast, he was curious as to how long he would have to be welded to the organ inside the skull. How complicated were these species, and how intricate was their existence amongst themselves and their cohabitants on this tiny blue planet? Instead, he was instantly at ease when he soon realized, on the blow of a whistle, that all that was required of him was to engage in violence to block one soldier from reaching the friend soldier, the one carrying the pig-skinned oval. "Head in the game!" yelled a friend. A slap hit the back of Nano's host's helmet and sent a jolt of pain down the nerve endings that stung. He turned to face the culprit, dressed in the same friendly green attire. He shoved the teammate backward, resulting in the player being momentarily airborne. Nano had brought with him some of his Stogatronian carbon strength that had translated into his host, who was already enormous by human standards. This allowed him to inflict further pain on perceived threats. The green players rushed over and surrounded him. They began to berate him. "The fuck is the matter with you, Landon?" one asked. "Get your head in the fucking game," said another. "Landon, that must be the host's identifying tag." Nano nodded, and this seemed to appease the friendlies. No one slapped the back of the helmet again, which satisfied Nano. The blow of a whistle resulted in both armies lining up to face one another. Nano was eager not to draw attention to himself and his misunderstandings of etiquette. He followed suit and lined up on the end. He knelt down like the others and looked up with his knees bent and his neck tilted. The opposing foe looked at him dead in the eyes. Ferocity was obvious in his pupils. They were dilated. Nano remembered his training, the skin around the eyes, whilst curved in a frown of anger and hostility, masked a perceived fear that was radiating through the pupils. The foe was intimidated. Nano ran a brief scan through his files to see if there had been any updates made in the interim of his location arrival and his attachment to the neural processor of the host. There were no direct files on psychology, but the evolutionary signs were obvious. Nano looked over his opponent to size up his physique. The man was fit, there was no doubt. He had spent time working on his body mass. This would be a challenging appointment if it weren't for the Stagatronian carbon that would allow Nano to rip him apart. A whistle blew once more, and the enemies collided. Nano watched as his opposite ran in a forward motion and locked his arms and his shoulder to ram right into Nano's host's head. Nano was caught off guard and was shoved to the ground, but managed to lift his arm to grab the grill of the helmet in front of his opponent's mouth and held on tight. This stopped the red-helmeted player from continuing his assault on the friend who carried the pigskin in the comfort of the crevice of his arm. The enemy turned back to face Nano's host and began to kick the knees in order to free himself from the grip that Nano had on the mask. The kicks were registering hard, so Nano could tell. The studs of his boots dug into the white fabric of the pants and pierced through to the skin. Blood began to pour out. This would be painful for the host, Nano observed. To end the assault, Nano turned the body of his host, continuing to hold the grill of the helmet of the enemy in red. He swiveled his arms and threw the body of the player with all the might of the host and the power of the Stagatronian carbon. The body clipped off the enemy and swung far out into the bleachers of the capacity crowd. The head was still inside the helmet, which was still in the hands of the host that Nano controlled. There was a collective hush over the 83,000 participants inside the dome that housed the war, which Nano later found out was actually a ritual game not meant to be played in such an aggressive manner. The hush was long and followed by the eruption of screams as everyone Nano observed had long drawn-out expressions and open mouths. Nano later identified this as pure shock. No one in the vicinity of the football match had experienced an instance of a decapitation within the context of the game before. Nano found this hard to believe, considering the aggressive nature of the play. Nano's host was taken to a holding area where his arms were held behind his back with metal locks in place. The host also had his own helmet removed inside the office where he was escorted. This allowed Nano the option to remove himself from the cerebral cortex. The host was about to be questioned by a series of men in formal human attire. Nano believed this would be an ideal time to leave and explore another human for which to draw and extrapolate Earth's culture. Nano would learn from this experience and not engage in so much ultraviolence going forward. Nano found another host, minutes later, someone who was retreating from the game in a communal mode of transport. This person, it was later revealed, was known as a teacher. Nano made sure to investigate what was required of such a position before the new host was due to teach the class at the next available sunrise.
For more stories of fact-based fiction, head to jimmins.substack.com.